Today is second Sunday after Pentecost, and the Gospel is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, starting with the chapter 9, verses 35 to chapter 10, verses 8. Before we go into today's reading in more detail, I want to mention two things you might have noticed. First, this reading marked a transformation of the 12 from disciples to apostles. As disciples, they followed Jesus, were with him, and learned from him. As apostles, however, they have to leave him and to go out into the world and do the same type of work that he did. In contemporary terms, it might be like graduating from the seminary and going to work in a real church. And for them, they no longer were just learning at the feet of the Master. They were called and empowered to put their excess experience into practice. The second point relates to Jesus' seemingly curious instruction that the 12 were to go only to the Jews and not among Gentiles or Samaritans. Why did he say that? After all, we know that the ministry of Paul was directed to the Gentiles. Paul said the gospel was for salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentiles. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. And we will see later in the Matthew's Gospel that Jesus told his disciples to go out and make disciples of all nations. Chapter 28, verses 19. The answer is found in the Old Testament, reading from Exodus that describes God's covenant with the Hebrews as his chosen people in the Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 to 6. That has never changed. They suffered his wrath for their disobedience, but not his complete rejection. A remnant always was left, and Jesus knew that. He first wanted to give the Jews an opportunity to accept him as their Messiah. Also, Jesus and the 12 were in the middle of a large Jewish population anyway, and he didn't want them to go too far away on their first mission. Remember when your kids were little and asked to go outside? You told them to stay in the yard. That didn't mean that they always would be confined to the yard. As they were ready to go further, it was the same for the disciples. With that, let's examine the central parts of this message. Matthew said, when Jesus saw the crowd, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. We know from history that Jews indeed were harassed. They had been captives in their own land for centuries and were suffering under the boot of the most current rulers, the Romans. In addition, they were spiritually helpless and without leadership. Their worship has been corrupted over the years by unfaithful priests who bought and sold their offices. Other leaders, such as Pharisees, were unwilling to accept Jesus' teachings. So the opportunity for a harvest was very real. And here Jesus used the term harvest not as a reference to Judgment Day or Second Coming, but rather to describe current realities. The situation was desperate and the need was urgent. And so Jesus sent the disciples out to cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Can you imagine their reaction when they heard that? For some time now, Jesus himself had been doing this work, but now he told them to cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. They might have thought, "Are you kidding? You are the miracle worker, not us." The actual response, however, was more respectful. If we read further in the Bible, we see that they did as Jesus told them, with the power he gave them, especially in Mark chapter 6, verses 12 to 13. This was the beginning of their own ministry that was carried out so effectively when they were touched by the Holy Spirit at the Pentecost. This mission of the first 12 to go out and begin establish communities of faith was the first step in establishing the church that has continued to the present day. And the church calls us today to minister in the same way. The mission field still is out there, so here we are. Jesus said that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. The harvest always has been plentiful. It has ever been so. It was true then, and it is true now. And today, we emphasize the importance of people in the harvest. Amen.